Tonight, known unknowns.
We don't yet know exactly what these three objects were.
What we know and don't know about those aerial objects shot down over U.S. and Canadian airspace, and the Chinese spy balloon shot down off the coast of South Carolina. Plus, CBN's David Brody sits down with former President Trump's primary challenger.
You had said at one point, obviously, that you would not run if he did.
I think it's time that we focus on the fact that we can't keep talking about old issues and the status quo.
And shockwaves. Backlash from the people living near the toxic train derailment in Ohio. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The president breaks his silence over those unidentified aerial objects. Good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. Not related to China's spy balloon program. That's what the president said today, talking about the three latest objects shot down from U.S. airspace. Tonight, though, there are still a lot of questions, including where these objects came from and who they belong to. CBN News White House correspondent Abigail Robertson has more on the president's remarks today. Abigail?
Well, Jenna, today was the first time President Biden gave a somewhat thorough update on the Chinese spy balloon and those three objects that were shot down over U.S. airspace. And in his remarks today, he said that he wanted to make it clear that there's not necessarily an increase in objects, but there is an increase in radar, which is why we're suddenly seeing more. Take a look.
We acted out of an abundance of caution and an opportunity that allowed us to take down these objects safely. Our military and the Canadian military are seeking to recover the debris so we can learn more about these three objects. Our intelligence community is still assessing all three incidences.
President Biden says going forward, he's directed his team to develop sharper rules for determining how to deal with unidentified objects, and acknowledged a lot of questions remain about the three shot down last weekend. President Biden closed by saying he makes no apologies for shooting down the Chinese spy balloon, and he announced plans to speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping soon, and said he hopes to get to the bottom of this. Jenna?
All right, White House correspondent Abigail Robertson, thank you very much. And here with us now is Dr. Patrick Cronin, Asia Pacific Security Chair at the Hudson Institute. Dr. Cronin, welcome. It's good to have you with us this evening. So what did you make of the president's comments today?
Well, it was important he filled the vacuum where rumors were running rife, because there'd been a vacuum of authoritative information between the shooting down of the spy surveillance airship on 4 February and the three research balloons that were shot down the next week.
You know, he said it made it seem like these balloons were, these last three that were shot down, recreational or belonging, privately owned. What did you make of that? He says these are probably not linked to China's spy balloon program.
Yes, I don't think they were. I'm surprised that we didn't have better airplane surveillance of the three balloons before we shot them down. We had U-2 surveillance of the surveillance airship before it was eventually shot down. And it gave a great high fidelity of information about the surveillance gear on them. These were obviously smaller and apparently research balloons, and therefore it would have been better if we avoided shooting Sidewinder missiles over Alaska or Canada or anywhere in North America if we didn't have to.
The president says U.S. defense and radar systems have been recalibrated to detect smaller aerial objects. Should that be reassuring to Americans?
Well, it should be, yes. I mean, I think it was very unsettling for the United States government to find out that a Chinese surveillance airship was hovering over ICBM fields. That went against anything we'd seen before. And as a result, they changed the aperture of the radar. We started looking and found other unidentified flying objects. And sure enough, there are a lot of research balloons up there out of an abundance of caution for air safety, but also because we didn't know if they could be related to the surveillance program, they were shot down. So we should be reassured, but we do need tighter rules so that we can shoot down only those things that are truly threatening.
Yeah, as you said, the president said that they were shot down out of an abundance of caution. Are our intelligence and military communities adept enough to keep up with quickly changing surveillance technology like this?
They are, but we're just not used to it on the homeland. It's been a long time since we were in the Cold War thinking about Soviet ICBMs. we need to step up our game here and think about the abundance of threats that could come into the United States through our borders and our skies.
Dr. Cronin, what more would you have liked to have heard from the president today?
It sounds like the government is still collecting facts, and I think he owes it to all of us and to the world to hear a firm assessment of the facts. I think he's at least put a sort of a separation between the three research balloons, apparently, and the air surveillance ship, and I think that was important. So let's wait for the authoritative assessment to come out of the Pentagon and the White House.
All right. Dr. Patrick Cronin with the Hudson Institute, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
My pleasure.
All right, election 2024. Former President Trump's Republican primary challenger is calling for a new generation of leadership. Nikki Haley also taking a strong stand for historic American values, her Christian faith, and supporting Israel. CBN News chief political analyst David Brody sat down with Haley in her home state of South Carolina.
I am running for President of the United States of America.
In front of a packed house in Charleston, Nikki Haley came out swinging.
America is not past our prime. It's just that our politicians are past theirs.
Afterward, we sat down with the new presidential candidate who's preaching a message of generational change.
Elected officials should come, do their job, and leave and let fresh blood come in. That hasn't happened. And so we have to have term limits in Congress.
That mantra also means running against former President Trump.
You had said at one point, obviously, that you would not run if he did.
David, we have lost the last 7 out of 8 popular votes for president. I think it's time for a new generation. I think it's time for someone who can speak that in a way that we bring more people in. And I think it's time that we focus on the fact that we can't keep talking about old issues and the status quo.
In order to make it past Trump or anyone else for that matter, the former UN ambassador and South Carolina governor will need support from the evangelical voting bloc. And she's making a case on abortion, saying it's time to pursue certain limits now that the High Court has overturned Roe.
They can have the debate on whether that means 15 weeks or 10 weeks or 6 weeks. But let's at least start with the fact that we don't think that abortions up until the time of birth is acceptable. And let's accept the fact that we do want to save as many babies as possible and then go from there.
What is the pitch specifically to those key primary voters, the evangelicals?
So the first thing I'll tell you, there's no pitch. I am a person that every day walks with my faith on my shoulders and knows that I can't get through a day without God. And so I don't need to pitch anyone. I think they see it. I think they feel it. I think they know who I am.
After growing up in the Sikh faith, Haley converted to Christianity, and her announcement speech included an evangelical flavor.
Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for God will be with you wherever you go.
Plus, a prominent pro-Israel evangelical pastor delivered the opening prayer.
The senior pastor of Cornerstone Church, John Hagee.
He is loved in Israel. He's loved in America.
That represents a lot about what you are about, God, Israel, and the Judeo-Christian fabric of this country. Is that the way you see it?
Yes, and we don't need to go away from that. We need to dig deep. We need to pull into that.
Double down, if you will.
Absolutely, and that's why I wanted him to be here, because I knew he'd set the tone like nobody else.
Haley says the tone set by Joe Biden is a morally dark one, especially when it comes to indoctrinating children on gender ideology.
Many evangelicals see this as a spiritual battle of what's taking place in our country today. Spiritual warfare, if you will.
It absolutely is spiritual warfare. This is about parents and children and their church. And all of those issues need to be decided at home. They don't need to be talked about in schools. They don't need to be spread here. I mean, all of this wokeism is trying to change the core of what the family is.
It's a very different America from yesteryear, something Haley would like to recapture.
The biggest crisis I see is the national self-loathing that has taken over our country. I mean, the media has really gotten to where they've told Americans our country is bad, our country is racist, our country is rotten to the core, and that's just not true.
Haley's candidacy comes at a time when the current GOP power players want an America First agenda that steps back from funding wars like the one between Russia and Ukraine.
I don't think we need to put troops on the ground. I don't think we need to write them blank checks. But they have the passion to fight for their own freedom. Give them the ammunition to do it. If they lose this fight, Russia's not going to stop at Ukraine. They're going to go into Poland and the Baltics, and we've got a world war on our hands.
Right now, Haley faces a different kind of battle and takes the field without ever having lost an election.
May the best woman win.
Nikki Haley will now move from her home state here in South Carolina to the early primary states of New Hampshire and Iowa later this week. It's a key time for Haley because other than Trump, she pretty much will have the stage all to herself, trying to convince voters that she's the one they need to choose, and that GOP primary field is going to get very crowded very quickly. David Brody, CBN News, Charleston, South Carolina.
And here with us now, Nathan Gonzalez, editor and publisher of Inside Elections and a Faith Nation contributor. Nathan, good to have you on tonight. So let's start there. David said it himself, this Republican primary field's about to get very crowded. Nikki Haley's pretty much on her own right now with Donald Trump. We do know that as it gets more and more crowded, that helps Donald Trump, just like it did in 2016.
Yeah, and we know that this is the case because right when Nikki Haley made her announcement, one of Jason Miller, one of Trump's spokespeople and someone in Trump world, retweeted a story about sort of the more the merrier. And then subsequent to that, there's even an official kind of Trump campaign was promoting the story about the more the merrier. So I think it's not really a surprise that they realize that former President Trump still has a solid base of about 25 to 30% in the Republican primary that probably isn't going to move from him. And the more candidates that divide up the other part of that is better for Trump. One thing is interesting is Nikki Haley made her announcement. I actually pulled up my notes when I first interviewed her in June of 2009 when she was running for governor. And one of the things stuck out to me is that when she ran for the state house, the South Carolina House in 2004, she ran against a politician, an incumbent politician that was basically double her age. So when she's talking about a new generation and she's talking about maybe mental tests for those politicians that are over 75 years old, this is not new to her. She has run and succeeded against aging politicians before. So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of line plays out in this particular race.
Yeah, that is interesting. You wonder how, the American public sort of sees that line again, about age and all of that. So speaking of Donald Trump, in 2020, he made claims of widespread election fraud in Georgia. A report on that, though, that came out today, says that there was no such thing, Nathan. Do findings like this mean anything for Trump and his re-election bid, or is it Teflon Don?
Well, I think most Republican primary voters have moved on. I mean that this is not something that's going to move the needle. I do think that one of the things that's interesting with Trump, and as he seeks the nomination once again, is he has to, I think, get his footing on the message. One of the reasons why he was so successful in 2016 was that he was the voice of a group of people who felt like they weren't being heard. And it was about the people rather than about him. And now as this race has started to evolve and Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida has started to pop up, you'll hear Trump talking about disloyalty, that DeSantis is being disloyal because Trump helped him in his primary, so DeSantis should be deferring to him in that. And to me, that's not really a compelling message for Trump, right? That makes it about him and who's disloyal. It's not about, again, being the voice for a group of people who aren't being heard.
Yeah, to your point, he's come up with a lot of nicknames for Ron DeSantis, and none of those really have seemed to stick up to this point. We'll see what else he comes up with. Nathan, just a few seconds left, but still no 2024 announcement from President Biden. What's the holdup? Do you think he's waiting for something to happen or the perfect moment?
Well, I still think he's going. I actually am still skeptical that he's going to run. I know that everything is moving in that direction, but Democrats have got to be careful that they're going to potentially hitch their wagon behind an 80-year-old politician who is still a majority of Americans disapprove of the job he's doing. That is a risky proposition heading into 2024.
All right, Nathan Gonzalez of Inside Elections. Always good to have you on with your expertise. Thanks, Nathan.
Thanks, Jenna.
And coming up, Congress heading toward another debt limit battle as the economy faces a caustic mix of still high inflation and a strong labor market. Tonight, new alarm bells over the debt limit. The Congressional Budget Office warning the U.S. is in danger of hitting a catastrophic default between July and September if Congress doesn't make a deal on the debt ceiling. The new timetable estimates the government could add nearly $19 trillion in new debt over the next decade if it stays on this course. With that, let's bring in Mark Hamrick, Senior Economic Analyst and Washington Bureau Chief at Bankrate. Mark, good to have you on the show tonight. So how dire is this? What are the repercussions for the greater economy if the U.S. were to default on its debt in the next 5 to 7 months?
It's agreed, I think, that it could be cataclysmic for the U.S. economy, and unfortunately entirely self-inflicted, because the debt limit itself doesn't resolve the problem. All it does is cause a problem. It doesn't restrict spending. It simply restricts the government's ability to borrow and to spend to meet its already established obligations. So I think this is why it's broadly regarded, even among those who might have other political differences, that this is something that would be unacceptable, that the debt limit must be raised. There's even an argument for getting rid of the debt limit, which is a separate argument from trying to restrain spending, which I think there's a growing body of evidence that that's a conversation that also needs to be had.
The numbers are mind-boggling. The nation's debt right now exceeds $31 trillion. The CBO estimates will add another $19 trillion to that over just 10 years. Mark, is that sustainable?
It's not sustainable over the long term, but this is why it's such a tragedy, in a sense, that this has been an area of bipartisan differences, whereas decades ago in Washington, and sporadically in the recent past, there have been times where members of both parties have been able to come together and agree to restrain spending, to agree on what the budget ought to be. But this is another part of our broken political system where our elected officials have either been unwilling or unable to come to a sensible agreement.
Today's jobless claims show a remarkably strong and steady job market. That's in the face of the Fed's interest rate hikes to stem still record high inflation. The Fed's last hike, not as big as the others, Mark. Did the central bank start to take its foot off the gas too soon?
Well, I don't think they're ready to take their foot off of the brake in the sense of continuing to raise interest rates. It's widely expected now in financial markets that they may have 3 miniature rate increases in store. We'll find out about what the projections are at the next Federal Reserve meeting coming up in a few weeks. If anything, the economy is looking more robust here in the first quarter, and that may compel the Federal Reserve to continue to raise interest rates. They are stair-stepping down with respect to the magnitude of the particular hike, but they may continue to raise and hold rates higher for longer, Jenna.
All right, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. Great to have you on this Thursday. As always, thank you so much. Have a great night. All right, when we come back, backlash from the people caught up in the aftermath of that devastating toxic train derailment in Ohio. You're watching CBN's Faith Nation. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Tonight, the death toll for the Turkey-Syria earthquake is nearing 42,000 as search and rescue operations wind down and recovery efforts continue. CBN's Operation Blessing has been on the ground in Turkey, aiding victims with basic needs. Any survivors are now in tents, facing brutal nighttime temperatures in the disaster area.
You came. You found us. We thank all of you. God bless you. You gave us food. We are waiting for all of your support and help.
The victims in Turkey and Syria, many of them children, still need clothing and food as millions attempt to rebuild their lives. If you'd like to help Operation Blessing's disaster relief effort, you can call 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com or text OBDR to 71777. Back here at home, backlash at a town hall in East Palestine, Ohio. The people living near the site of a toxic train derailment 2 weeks ago, demanding answers last night, wanting to know if it's still safe to live near their town.
Kids feel safe with the small grocery.
My grandson, who's 11, has multiple rashes on his extremities.
Many have reported serious symptoms, including sore throats, burning eyes, and vomiting. A class action lawsuit has been filed against the railroad Norfolk Southern. Republican Senators Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance sent a letter to Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg questioning his oversight of the freight rail system. Life in prison without parole. That's the sentence for 19-year-old white supremacist Peyton Gendron, who killed 10 black people in a mass shooting at a Buffalo supermarket last May. Relatives of his victims confronted him with their pain and anger, one rushing him from the audience at one point. Gendron's victims include a grandmother of 9 and a church deacon. Still ahead, a community struck by tragedy, finding comfort in numbers and amazing grace. Finally tonight, the country is once again grieving as another community is struck by tragedy. Just 3 days since Monday's shooting at Michigan State University ended the lives of 3 students, hundreds attended a vigil on campus, finding comfort in community and the lyrics of Amazing Grace. Beautiful voice. And the university's basketball coach and a father of a student, Tom Izzo, encouraged students to help each other find joy.
But with a shared commitment to help each other and a promise to remember those we have lost, we will learn to find joy once again. I think everybody spoke that something has to be done in our society.
All right. Well, we'll leave it on that note tonight. Our hearts, of course, go out to the people of Michigan State. And we thank you for joining us tonight. We'll see you right back here again tomorrow. Have a great evening.